Welcome to another episode of Creating Cultures that Outperform. We are kicking off a new series. I'm very proud to tell you it's called How to Increase Workforce Productivity. If you've been following our shows, you know that both PwC and Burson Associates produce a set of research on the need for companies to increase workforce productivity. So, this is episode one of the series. It's going to be a whole series of episodes. We're going to take you on a journey through a set of things you need to do in order. You don't have to do them all perfectly. You can go back and tweak them. You're always going to do that. But today, we're really going to be starting with this strategy, planning, and organization, where work begins. And how much does productivity really matter at this moment in time? Well, interestingly, PwC did a survey of 4,702 actually global CEOs, and the takeaway was that 40% of those 4,700 CEOs, there was a consensus that 40% of the work done in their organization produces no value. A lot of motion, no momentum, 110% busy, 60% productive. That is what you find in the typical company. We find that through our own research of people productive. You know, when we go in and score companies, the mean score is like 3.21. That's about a B minus. And you're talking about tons of unproductive activities, meetings that never end, things that are run inefficiently, decisions that don't get made. We can go down the list, but we're going to go through the things you have to get right that will raise your scores, give you an A plus, and ultimately allow you to run a very productive company. And if you don't address this and make productivity one of the top priorities in your company, then you're going to join the ranks of the 45% of the CEOs who believe that their company will not exist in 10 years because they can't move fast enough. They can't transform. They can't get things done. So it's never been more important. So let's talk about where work begins. You've got to chart the course and establish who owns what. Terri, do you think this is important?
This is incredibly important. And unfortunately, most organizations don't spend enough time in this space really defining who's on first. We spend a lot of time just doing the same things that we've always done, expecting a different result. And we
Yep.
all know that that is the definition of insanity. We keep trying to push people to do more with less. We
Yeah.
constantly are expecting more output. But if you're not taking the time to lay the foundation and set things in order right from the start, then people end up spinning their wheels, wasting time on tasks that don't really have any meaning. They don't impact the bottom line. They are not tasks that actually move the needle forward.
How about that?
And you're evaluating you're basically evaluating the organization on metrics, but you have nothing in place to actually help people accomplish the goals that you're trying to evaluate yourself against. So there's this big disconnect, and absolutely Peter Drucker got it right. There's nothing so useless as doing efficiently that which should not be done at all. So we've got people wasting time on meaningless tasks that don't really help us, that don't really get us to the point where we're meeting goals. We're not meeting any goals with some of these activities. We're just doing them because we've always done them. And those organizations that continue to function like that, they're going to continue to see a decline in their employee engagement. They're going to continue to see a decline in productivity because they're measuring the wrong thing. And they're going to not meet goals. They're not going to meet those business objectives that they're trying to reach because they're doing all the wrong things. So setting this time in this order for strategy and planning is huge. Spending the time to make sure that people understand what their responsibility I can't talk. What their responsibilities are is so important.
I'm going to impersonate Terri again. Blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, I know. Blah, 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 blah. I haven't had the blah, blahs in a long time. But making sure that people understand what they're responsible for, what they're accountable for, what they're, that whole RACI chart, what are they contributing to? What are they influencing? So you have to really set that out from the start. You really do have to decide how you want the organization to be designed. How do you want the responsibilities to be laid out? How do you want what strategy are you using? Are you using a strategy at all, or are we just randomly doing things ad hoc and hoping that we're going to get to the end goal? You really got to take some time and set up some meetings to really discuss it and whiteboard it and think about it.
Yeah.
and think about it deeply, because how you set the foundation is how the rest of the project, the rest of the organization is going to run. So this is where everything begins. And if you set the foundation incorrectly from the start, there's no way you can build a house that's going to stand. There's no way you can continue to produce work that's going to be productive.
Yes.
It's just not possible.
Yeah, it is one of those things where strategy, planning, org design, accountabilities, this is hard work. This is very hard to do. And I've only seen it done effectively, at least in the organizations I ran, when we had a very clear process laid out. People understood the process. It was going to start in plenty of time to get it done. I worked in one company, they started the plans for next year in April. Oh my God, other companies were finishing up their prior year plans in April. We were starting to think about it. And that was a little bit early to get people focused, but at least, by the time September rolled around, you had a pretty good framework and beat on what people were going to be working on. So you had time to refine it.
Right.
The process, you've got to have it come top down and bottom up. You've got to find out all the things that should be happening very strategically in the company. What are all the things from the bottom, run the business? What are the ideas coming in from the people on the bottom who own all the technology and the moving parts? What are they seeing that should be addressed? What's your process for actually prioritizing all this stuff? When you come up with the final strategy, how does that impact the organization? Where is that work going to get done? What kind of staffing you're going to have to add to do it? You're going to have new skills and new technologies coming in, no question about it. We're in this period of continuous transformation where companies are integrating all sorts of new technologies. It's not just AI. Things are moving and moving very quickly. And depending on what industry you're in, there's things happening that you've got to be on top of. And so you've got to take that and you've got to lay out the org structure and be able to communicate very clearly why the organization is being arranged the way it is. And then you got to do the heavy lifting. And you should go watch our 4-part series on org design and how to really do it well. It is an art. There's no question about it. And people get down to basically boxes with a couple of roles. They almost never get down to saying who owns what responsibilities go to what role, who is really responsible, who's accountable, who's consulted. You need that RACI laid out, for each of these responsibilities. So you have complete clarity. And when you really get that done, things start to move well. It is a challenge, but we're talking productivity. Productivity is the most effective and efficient use of talent. Effective because you're working on the right things and people are aligned. Efficient because you're not running around wasting time in meetings that just are completely unnecessary and don't work, or, waiting for decisions to get made, 3 levels above you and holding up the entire project and things that you're working on. So it's got to be efficient and effective. They're different. And it's very, very important.
Yeah. How many times have we been in a project where nobody understands demand management?
Oh my God.
We've got all these tasks and nobody wants to take ownership because it hasn't been defined. So you can't really effectively say that this organization or that part of the organization is responsible for something because nobody has taken the time to define it clearly. There are always those gray areas that come back to bite you in the butt. And so
hey, fight it out. Here's what we're doing. You guys fight it out.
If you can spell that out in advance, now when the tasks start rolling in, when things need to get done, you know exactly what part of the organization needs to be involved, and you know how to bring the right people to the table. So you're having the right conversation with the right people, and you're making decisions much more quickly because you have the right people in the room. You're not waiting and constantly scheduling meetings to find out it's not the right group. And then you've got to schedule a meeting with somebody else. And then you got to schedule a meeting with somebody else. And the next person they understand what you're asking, but they don't have the authority to make the decision. So you got to schedule another meeting with somebody else.
And the nightmare unfolds.
That just churns through your time. Your project timeline gets obliterated because of silly things like that. And that's not an exaggeration. That is actually exactly how it happens when you don't have things fully defined up front.
Yeah, and it's so important. You've got to get down to defining who owns what. So that's not just the organization, but those are the real accountabilities. Who owns what? And that is going to help prevent people from having turf wars and battles over stuff. It's got to be laid out clearly, and it's not the role of the people to fight over it. Management has to lay that out. Leaders have to make sure that that is absolutely clear and hold the people under them accountable for finishing the fine detail work that goes into that. And this stuff takes time, but you save all the time later because time is wasted as people don't understand this stuff. And so you think it takes a lot of time to do it right. Boy, just see how much time it takes if you do it wrong. Everybody's running around. Things aren't happening the way they should be happening. So this really matters. And when you really put a strategy together, you've got to be going somewhere. You've got to have an animating vision of where you're going to go, why you're getting there. And the executives have to really animate the organization. It's called organizational energy, to lift up the passion and the mood, make people feel they're part of something. This is a journey. And here's the steps we're taking. So all of that really matters. So the communication piece has to be in there on the top to animate the organization to move forward. So all these pieces just have to fall in place and be done right.
Yeah.
You've got to have
clear lines too of authority, so that when you do need to make decisions, it's not this, game of find the manager. You actually know exactly who's responsible for what and who has authority to do what, who can approve what. So you know exactly where in the organization to go, and make sure you're empowering the leaders so that they can make some of those smaller decisions. They don't have to go to leadership for everything, but you do need to have some clear lines of authority so that people understand when they do need manager approval or a higher level approval, they know where to go. They're not just trying to figure it out on their own.
Yeah. And so this is a piece you've got to get right. This is the beginning of the journey. This is where work really does begin. And so if you get this right, you've now got those lines of authority established. The communication is going to be easier. The work is going to flow. People are going to be able to collaborate across boundaries because they know where the boundaries are. They know who owns what. They're going to run a much more inclusive organization. They'll know who the right people are to include when they're working on certain pieces of the strategy. So this stuff is vitally important. Spend the time, start early, make room for this. I know companies have no room because people are 110% busy, and that's why they're just stuck on this treadmill of ineffective and inefficient use of people, because that's really where most companies are. And that's why 45% of CEOs feel they're not going to be around in 10 years. Their companies, their organizations are not going to be there, because that's an incredible waste. If you're of a competitor who's 20% better at using their talent than you, just add up the amount of productivity they're generating that you're not, and how much momentum and speed they're going to pick up over you. And hopefully they got the strategy right, so they're heading in the right direction, right? That you're going to have to figure out on your own.
Yeah.
So we've got a whole series on this. Our next episode is going to be on creating a safe culture, because once you know and understand where you're going, you've got to communicate it. Now you've got to create a culture where it's safe to be really productive, to be yourself, be productive. We're going to talk about safe culture. There are a set of factors that drive that. You got to get those right. That's the next step in the process of building an incredibly productive organization. So we'll see you next week. We're here every Wednesday at 3:00. Don't forget to tune in. This is a great series. It's going to be going on for a couple of more than 2 months. And so we're covering how to increase workforce productivity, certainly one of the most important topics at this moment in time.
Yes.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you.